James Bond was in the Albuquerque Sunport, Southwest Airlines stopover, awaiting his bag at the baggage carousel for his connecting flight to Washington. He had a meeting tomorrow with an officer of the NSA near the Pentagon. Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke to him from the group surrounding the carousel.
"Shalom, Mr. Bond."
He had not seen the woman since she stood behind a pillar.
Sarah? Sarah Goldberg? Why, I haven't seen you in years.
He immediately checked the nearby passengers to see if anyone was paying particular attention to them. The woman he had addressed approached him smoothly and wrapped her arms around his neck and shoulder.
"Just walk with me, James."
Her voice seemed tense. He picked up his bags and followed her away from the carousel.
"What are you doing here?"
she asked quietly. Bond answered.
Just passing through, Sarah, on my way to Washington. What is the Mossad's loveliest agent doing in the middle of the American West? Or, aren't you allowed to say?
"Busman's holiday, James. I am following an Al-Qaeda suspect on my leave. He's that fellow,"
Sarah explained. Bond looked in the window reflection in the airport bar and saw 3 men leaving the baggage claim area.
"I'm trying to find proof that he's actually Muslim. But I've only got 2 days left before I'm to report to New York. He came here with the long-haired fellow and met the tall man with the beret on the flight from Quebec,"
Sarah claimed.
So how on earth are you going to prove that he is Muslim?
Bond asked.
"Well, every morning that he has been here, he goes to Sandia Peak and disappears for several minutes. I've been trying to see if he is performing his morning prayers. That native fellow stopped me this morning from getting near the edge of the overlook, so I am thinking that he is over there somewhere. If he is, then that will prove to me that he is Muslim and confirm my other information that he is actually Algerian and not American. He claims to be a Mormon member of Brigham Young University. Apparently his credentials with the energy department at BYU are excellent. I have trailed him from the Sudan. He changed into that get-up in Madrid. Then flew to Cleveland, then here. He has made 2 trips to Sandia Labs in the last week. But I could not get in to see anybody without help from Tel Aviv. Now, it is my vacation. Do you have to run off to Washington right away? Or?"
She smiled. The La Quinta Inn is a whitewashed stucco building housing some of Albuquerque's finest rooms. Brightly lit tile baths with sunken whirlpool tubs. Ergonomic and rich wooden furniture and king-sized beds with handmade Native American blankets and quilts. Bond had been anticipating the first light breakfast but was disheartened to find that eggs were no longer served. He would have to settle for fresh fruit and coffee. He rolled over lightly and discovered that Sarah had fallen into a deep sleep. He caressed her dark bangs and decided to grab a shower. Like 2 ships passing through the night. He slipped out of the bed and retrieved the Walther PPK out from under his pillow and replaced it in his Burns Martin holster inside his Q-pack. He padded quietly to the bath, instinctively checking the sitting room before going in for his shower. He dropped naked onto the white Korean tile and did his morning exercises until his stomach and arms ached. He could feel the slight perspiration gather at his joints as he rose above the glistening floor. After satisfying himself that was prepared for the day, he proceeded to jump into a steaming shower. Down on the first floor of the La Quinta, the night security man returned from the toilet, rubbing his freshly washed hands together in anticipation of the next chapter in the Clive Cussler novel. His attention was pulled away from his book by the green diode signaling that motion had been recorded in one of the upper hallways. Someone had left their room. He liked to log these for the house detective. He backed up the digital recording after booting up another recorder and started to watch. The first thing he noticed was that this was a long-haired man. He had appeared in the hallway from the emergency stairs about 10 feet from the room that he stopped at. He must be a burglar, a second-story man, or worse, an enraged husband or boyfriend. The guard watched the man, and then triggered the silent alarm to the Albuquerque police. The man had used a master key to gain entry to the room. The other reason that the guard triggered the alarm was that there was, according to the guest log, an Israeli diplomat in the room. He certainly didn't want any international incidents, like a theft at the inn. He also noticed a large case the man had been carrying. Pablo smiled to himself. Another round eye bites the dust, as his Apache ancestors would say. The venom had worked excellently. The Jewess was catatonic but quite aware. She would see and feel everything that happened to her. The shower still ran in the bath, but he would be done and gone before anyone came from there. He opened his case, plugged in the chainsaw and began to work. James Bond finished his frigid shower and began to towel himself. He could hear an electric hairdryer in the bedroom and smiled to himself. He finished drying his feet and wrapped the towel around his waist. He opened the door to the bedroom and was struck with such surreal horror that he could not move for nearly 2 heartbeats. Sarah lay upon the bed, her arms and legs severed at the major bones. Another cut from the chainsaw had split her torso vertically until it had ripped through her heart. The large man, whom Bond recognized from the airport last night, chose that moment to turn off the chainsaw. By the time he realized that the shower wasn't running and turned toward the bath, Bond was almost upon him. The man was caught completely by surprise. If he had not been, he would have easily killed a naked Bond. He used his hands, his chainsaw, and the electric cord from his chainsaw to attack Bond. He clawed at Bond's chest mercilessly, ripping flesh and tearing skin. Bond could not get a grip on the man because of the slippery blood on the plastic butcher's apron he wore. But that also worked against Pablo as it tremendously reduced his movement. Eventually, Bond had wrapped the wet towel from his waist around the man's neck and had thrown him over his shoulder in a classic judo throw that simply snapped the murderer's neck. Just at that moment the local police barged in.
"Well, Mr. Bond, it appears that your story checks out,"
said the Albuquerque detective.
"Although your boss was extremely upset that you were involved in this business, Univex doesn't like any bad publicity, you know. It seems that this was a serial killing. This Apache, Pablo, was an enforcer during his youth for the Palomas Hispanic gang that smuggles aliens from Mexico. He's been in prison a few times, but we've never been able to pin any of these chainsaw murders, 6 of them, on him. You wouldn't happen to know why he picked Ms. Goldberg, would you?"
Bond shook his head. He knew his Tony Hillerman, and he knew that these New Mexico tribal police were a lot smarter than they acted. He addressed the police lieutenant.
Please let the Israeli consulate in New York know about this terrible misfortune. Miss Goldberg was a very important person.
That doesn't answer my question. I'll contact the consulate. Why do you think that she didn't fight him?"
The detective asked. Bond looked at him to see if he was being tested. He thought that he was, so he answered.
Well, actually I think that spray bottle that your investigator found probably has something to do with it. It wasn't here before. What do you think happened?
The detective frowned, accepting the truth of the matter, that this Bond was actually a security official of some kind. He then grimaced and said,
"It seems to be a form or mixture of snake venom, and it is used by the tribal shamans as a medicine. But, this is the first time I've ever witnessed its use for murder. Knowing that Pablo was the murderer and how he did it, answers several questions for us. You are probably free to go, but don't leave town until the inquest is over in 2 days."
Bond stopped at Le Troquet French restaurant and enjoyed wild-caught sea scallops, along with his burgundy lamb main course. He made a call to Sandia Labs and arranged a 3 o'clock meeting. Sandia National Laboratories began in 1945 on Sandia Army Air Corps Base. This allowed working closely with the military. Its purpose was to support Los Alamos and Project Manhattan. Sandia came into being as an ordnance design, testing, and assembly facility. The lab's mission has been to provide engineering design for non-nuclear components of the US as nuclear weapons. Sandia has a large laboratory and headquarters in Albuquerque with 6,600 employees. But Sandia now also performs a wide variety of national security research and development work. As a Department of Energy national laboratory, Sandia works in partnership with universities and industry. They provide scientific and engineering solutions to meet national needs and address emerging challenges for both government and industry. Since 1994, bomb disablement experts at Sandia National Laboratories have shared the latest in bomb disablement tools and approaches with police, military, federal and international bomb squads in 5-day, hands-on training conferences. The events focus on the science of explosives and the advanced technologies and methods necessary to protect the public from the dangerous explosive devices being fielded by terrorists and criminals. The workshops include classroom instruction and demonstrations of advanced disablement strategies, including vehicle bombs, and other issues. James Bond had excelled during his week's training here. His appointment was with George Peach, the Director of Training.
Good to see you, James,
said retired U.S. Army Captain George Peach.
Thank you, Captain Peach. I've come with some serious business. I need a referral to your university liaison officer.
Oh, that would be Mr. Conroy. I'll walk you over. So how's your boss? Still fit is he?
Peach asked.
Yes, fit enough to trim the Admiralty every once and a while,
claimed Bond.
Tom? Are you busy? Good. I'd like you to meet one of our very good graduates. He's got some university liaison business for you. Tom Conroy, this is
Commander James Bond, Royal Navy Intelligence. I've known Captain Peach since my training here. Good of you to see me.
Glad to meet you, Commander. What can I do for you?
Bond had used his RNID identity here since it was still active. Captain Peach and Bond sat down across the desk from Mr. Tom Conroy.
It is about Reverend Smith. I am inquiring about your discussions with him. What can you tell me about that?
Asked Bond.
Well, he was here as a representative of the Energy Department of Brigham Young University. He was here in regards to General Electric's Project Job. That is a long-term study that GE is conducting on their toxic waste storage facilities. He's here to arrange for the transfer of the waste from GE to BYU.
Tom Conroy explained.
How does that involve Sandia Labs?
Asked Bond.
Well, it is nuclear fuel pellets. Normally these would go straight to the mines, except for the project. Sandia is tasked with liaison between the supplier, in this case General Electric, and the university. We have got 10 shipments approved for shipment to BYU labs across the United States. 2 or 3 caskets per shipment. The pellets are inside a lead-lined casket, with a lead cement lining and seawater filling. There are 100 pellets per casket. Each is enclosed in glass bubbles to prevent any contact between the pellets. The pellets are then removed at the university labs with robotic arms and used for their studies. Why?
Asked Tom Conroy.
Well, for the very reason that Reverend Smith may, and I stress the word, may be a terrorist. When you say toxic waste, you mean like oil spills or something like that?
Asked Bond.
No. Mr. Bond, I don't mean an oil spill, although we do have to clean up many saltwater spills. I'm talking about these pellets being Chernobyl-type lethal material with near-zero survivability. If a man stood unprotected near one of these pellets for 1 hour, he would get bone cancer. He would die within a year. If exposed for 4 hours, he would get radiation sickness and die within a month. If he was exposed for 24 hours, he'd be dead tomorrow. If Reverend Smith is a terrorist, we shouldn't let him near any of this stuff. But, he's just the energy guy. He won't get anywhere near these pellets. He was just arranging for the transportation. In fact, GE handles everything else. The only input he's had on this process is the destination list. and we verified the list from BYU Energy separately via fax.
Explained Tom Conroy.
May I see the list?
Asked Bond.
Not without the proper authorization from the Atomic Energy Commission.
Explained Tom Conroy.
Okay, could you do me a favor, and check the addresses, separately from BYU?
Asked Bond.
Sure. Hang on. I will check Google Earth. Let us see. North Platte. There is no lab there. That's odd. George, could you ask Bill West to come in here please?
Tom Conroy asked. The tall man stepped out of the room and came back with a thin man in a grey checked suit.
Bill West is our chief of security. This is Mr. Bond. He'd like to discuss a toxic waste destination list with me. Could you approve that rather quickly please?
Mr. Bond, do you have any identification?
Asked Bill West. Bond handed him his Royal Navy card.
Oh. Yes, that will do. Can you tell me today's NATO Security Level 3 password?
Z324 Alpha Bravo 49.
It was an 8-digit hexadecimal code which rotated each day of the week. Being Wednesday, this was the correct code. Then Bill West stated,
It is okay, Tom, he is cleared above you. Hell, Mr. Bond, you're cleared above me.
Thank you, Bill. Right, well, sorry for the procedure, James, but these days we have to do it. Let us go to the conference room. Bill, can you ask Stan Hootman to join us? San Fernando, California, no listing for that address. Kennewick, Washington, no listing for address. New Baltimore, New York, is a suburb of Albany, no listing for that address. Brunswick, Maryland, no listing for that address. Detroit, Michigan, no listing for that address. That comes up as a parking lot. Shallows, Michigan, that's on the northern peninsula, no listing for that address. Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, no listing. What the hell is going on, Mr. Bond?
Asked Tom Conroy.
Well, apparently your 10 shipments are being rerouted, or set up to be hijacked. But, what if they are going to blow up your delivery trucks?
Asked Bond.
We will have to find out.
Spoke the newcomer to the group threat analyst Stan Hootman.
I am with threat analysis. I am going to say that they are either going to blow up the trucks and pollute the general area for several miles, or they are going to hijack them. But we need to get Phil Lancer in here.
Can you put that Maryland map back up on the screen, Tom? What if they dump the toxic waste into the river? That's the Potomac River, is it not?
Asked Bond.
Yes. It is. Phil, I am in conference room 203. Can you join us? We need you.
Stan Hootman asked. The four men waited patiently for the 2 minutes that it required for radiation specialist Phil Lancer to arrive at the conference room. Then, Tom Conroy explained the situation to him, ending with,
Phil, can you answer James' question about dumping the waste into the river?
Phil Lancer shook visibly, then calmed himself and proceeded.
Well, number 1, if they blow up the trucks, they will probably pollute a 10 square mile area with radioactive fallout. In the locations you've shown me, probably about 2,000 fatalities and 12,000 cases of cancer for each truck. If they hijacked them and transported them all to the same place, they could probably have enough to build a bomb, but we'd be able to track the trucks. The worst case scenario would involve stealing the caskets and pouring them into the river. Because the saltwater that the pellets are stored in would pollute the river water downstream. But that wouldn't be the big problem. The big problem would be the irradiating of the waterways. You see, the reason that the pellets are encased in glass and floated in saltwater is to keep them from attaining any significant mass at all. But each and every one is deadly, and worst of all, they are buoyant. They float. So they'll just float down the river to the sea, irradiating the entire river for the next 100 years. Also, this particular time of year is dangerous because there is a lot of flooding going on. So all those floodplains will be polluted, as well as the water sources for the various cities downriver.
Explained Phil Lancer.
You mean there could be that much damage? That's Los Angeles, Portland, Cincinnati, Albany, downriver that's Washington and New York. Not to mention the Great Lakes and the Mississippi. God help us.
Now Tom Conroy began to shake. Phil Lancer answered dryly.
Those cities would be radioactive wastelands, and the United States wouldn't have any fresh water unless you caught it in a rain barrel. Bin Laden claimed he was going to turn the USA into a desert. This would qualify.
The meeting had broken up rather quickly after that as Tom rushed to cancel the arrangements for the transfers. He had asked Bill West how to handle the phone call from Reverend Smith when he called tomorrow. Bill had said to answer that there was a problem with the list and could the Reverend please show up at the office to clarify an arrangement. Bond didn't think the good Reverend would ever show his face around New Mexico once the list was questioned. But he'd had an idea where he could find him. He stepped lightly upon the roof. He was as quiet as could be, although, with the giant motor humming in the background, it wasn't especially necessary. The tram car beneath him began to rise. The two Sandia Peak technicians in the car below him had entered at the same time that he had stepped on the roof. With luck, no one would ever prove he'd been there. He wore dark brown khaki pants, a dark brown jacket over his cotton shirt. He also wore his flight rig. He crouched beside the steel pillar and adjusted his pack. It was a brown backpack with the Q-Pack parachute inside. He liked to be prepared in most situations. Also the reason for the long package at his feet, at first glance like a furled sail. That was his backup escape plan. He didn't particularly like trams, too many bad memories. He wasn't Richard Burton, who'd apparently ridden to Schloss Adler atop a tram. Sandia Peak wasn't an owl, but this place reminded him of his parents. He would need all the luck he could find. He uttered a short prayer. He shielded his Ronson lighter and puffed on the specially made Moreland cigarette. He grabbed the pillar and stood facing away from the lower station. The sky in the east was just starting to lighten. In 1 hour the sun would rise. As the tram approached the top station at 10,300 feet, Bond looked to the west and saw the 11,000 square mile panoramic view of New Mexico. Many of Albuquerque's street lights still lit up the streets. The tram came to a stop and Bond grabbed his glider. He stowed the glider in the Southern Paths nook. There were 2 other large buildings as well as a few small ones up here. The largest building looked familiar to him. It was the High Finance Restaurant and Tavern. It offered the chance to enjoy the breathtaking beauty of the land of enchantment. The menu included slow-roasted prime rib, skillet-roasted ara tuna, flame-seared beef flambé, microbrewed ales, or flavorful wines. Bond was currently most interested in the fact that the restaurant served omelets, avoiding anyone who might be up here, like the restaurant staff, tram workers, or park rangers. He quickly reached the north slope of the ridge and found a convenient pine tree. Fashioning an anchor rope, he lowered himself over the side of the cliff. 900 feet below, the massive boulders were barely visible. One slip and he would be crushed on the rocks below. Unless, of course, he pulled the ripcord quickly on the Q-Pack parachute. Even then, he would suffer broken bones of some kind. An outcropping of rock shielded him from sight of the overlook platform. He swung on the cord and looked around the rock. There it was, a much smaller platform, with a gated access. A black wrought iron stair and platform reminiscent of someone's fire escape, led downward. This is where the Reverend Smith had been coming this week. Bond would find out why. Abdul Balik, number 1 Sudan agent of Al-Qaeda, who was the fake Reverend Smith, stood next to Renee. The third man in the car with them stood in the center of the car, grasping the handrail and squinting his eyes tightly shut.
Relax, Ruka, there is nothing you can do about this situation, you are in Allah's hands. Release yourself to him, and pray for your courage.
Abdul Balik assured him.
Renee, do you think the clouds will come in today? I don't want to miss sunrise.
The Canadian anarchist had not showered and stunk so badly that Abdul Bailey could barely breathe. "Oh, the things I do for Allah," he thought. Renee looked upward and sighed.
"I don't know, I wish we knew what happened to Pablo."
Pablo is a man of his word. He will contact us next week from Madrid to give us the details of his task. The Jewess had to be silenced. After my phone call today, we shall leave this operation to the separate cells to complete. We shall all meet in Alexandria next Friday. By that time the United States will be finished, Allah willing. We are here,"
said Abdul Bailey. He glanced at the seething Riker.
"Get your bearings. Right over there is solid ground."
Yes. You're right, Reverend. Sorry.
They glanced both left and right, and then turned left toward the overlook. The overlook was a wooden structure very like a patio deck. People could go right up to the edge and peer down at the jagged rocks 900 feet below. A light wind was blowing from the north. It appeared that a cloud may close on the mountain top before too long.
"Hurry, the sun is almost up,"
urged Abdul Bailey. He climbed over the small chain-link fence and proceeded down the iron staircase. At the bottom, nearly 15 feet below the overlook, he placed his prayer rug and knelt upon it facing Mecca. Then began his morning prayers. A few seconds later, a cloud enveloped the mountain. The visibility was reduced to 10 feet and a brutal snow began flying through the air. James Bond realized that this was the moment for action. The two thugs were near blind and Reverend Smith was praying to Allah. Bond quickly climbed the rope and started across the cliff top. The first person that he ran into was the tall man from Quebec. Bond attacked him and quickly learned that the man fancied himself a savate master. He tried to impress Bond with his fighting style. Bond thought that the man kicked very hard, but he'd seen The Matrix too many times. He was able to grasp the man's foot at one crucial point. Bond used the man's own weight to perform a judo throw. The man would have easily survived, except that the throw was over the side of the overlook. He screamed when he cleared the cloud, about 100 feet down. His scream lasted about 3 seconds before his life was extinguished. As Bond peered over the side, he could see that the Reverend was deep in prayer. He started to make his way to the chain fence. The bald-headed man jumped from his right and nearly knocked Bond over the side. The man fought mercilessly, and at one point, used Bond's backpack to drag him to the side rail. Bond barely had gotten out of the straps in time. He watched his Q-pack parachute sail out of sight in the mist. Then was able to push away from the railing. He drove the man across the overlook to the chain-link fence. He propelled him into the steel cross member. The man gasped, and went for Bond's throat. At that moment the cross member gave way. Bond and the man pitched out over empty space. Bond had hold of the steel and the man was hanging onto Bond's shoulder and arm. The cloud moved further southward at that moment.
"Don't look down,"
Bond said. The man punched Bond in the jaw. Riker couldn't stop himself, and he looked down. The steel protested with a sharp noise and the man let go of Bond. 4 seconds later he was a bright red stain on a rock below. Bond edged his way back to solid ground and crawled as quietly as he could over the fence at the stairway.
You were at the airport. Where is Renee? Where is Riker?
"They've gone to meet Allah. Reverend Smith, all the shipments of the nuclear pellets have been cancelled. You've failed in your little scheme."
Then Abdul Bailey pulled a knife from a concealed pocket of his jacket.
Move out of the way.
Bond backed up the staircase, and Abdul Bailey walked closer to it.
Go on, go up.
Bond chose his timing carefully, then leaped onto Abdul Bailey. Abdul Bailey was startled and quickly lost his knife. The knife fell away clattering against the rocks below. Bond and Abdul wrestled. Abdul desperately hung on to the wrought iron railing. While keeping his balance, Bond tripped the Sudanese. Abdul slipped off the platform. His arm now hung over the railing, his legs pumping for some purchase.
Help me, damn you, help me.
Abdul Balig's fingers grasped the iron railing as tightly as possible. Bond reached down and retrieved the prayer rug from the platform. He walked to the railing. He looked into Abdul Balig's eyes and said,
As Allah wills.
Then Bond threw the rug over the railing. Abdul Balig didn't even hesitate. He reached for the rug, caught it and lost his grip. He became a stain on the rocks. After he'd gotten back on the overlook, Bond straightened his jacket and walked over to the restaurant for that omelette. Sometime later, he realized that the same detective that he had spoken to yesterday was walking up the path toward the overlook with a park ranger. He finished his coffee, a Brazilian roast, and paid the cashier in cash. Then went south toward the tram station. He passed an Albuquerque patrolman standing outside the top station and then saw his glider. He'd prepared as backup. He unsnapped the wings and fashioned the cross brace into position. He snapped on the helmet and checked the patrolman again. The uniformed man was looking down the mountainside, presumably at the bloodstains on the rocks below. He pushed off the cliff top and plunged down the mountainside until the wings caught hold and he began to lift into the sky. He thought to himself,
Like two ships passing through the night.
He considered and realized it had been the texture of her hair. It had reminded him of Tracy, his wife. For that second he fell deeply in love with Sarah Goldberg, and mourned her. The detective from Albuquerque looked up at the hang glider and said,
Well, at least that guy brought his wings. Let's get these suicides cleaned off the rock before the tourists arrive.